Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Kellum. I am the Product Communication Specialist at Leica Camera USA. I'm here today with Bret Curry, an amazing photographer and cinematographer. Bret, good to see you. How you doing?
Good. Good to see you, Nathan. Good to talk to you.
This is a very exciting day. Now, Bret, you've been shooting with the Q, the Q2, and the Q3. We're going to talk about all these cameras today, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself to those who don't know you.
Yeah, so I'm a cinematographer and photographer, so I do both motion and stills work. Shoot commercial, film, branded content, et cetera, et cetera. Any cool projects that come along that, need visuals, I'm there. So yeah, that's basically me.
Wonderful. Well, folks, if you want to join the conversation, please use the questions to ask questions to Brett directly. We have a team of Academy members that will be filtering through the questions and sending them over. We also have the chat. So if you have any comments, we would love to see where you're coming in from, either from the States, what town. If you're outside the United States, we'd love to hear from you as well. All right, Brett. So as we talk about the Q system, I would love for you to start speaking about your journey with the Q. How did it start? Were you always a Leica shooter? Was maybe the Q the first Leica camera that you shot with? I would love to hear your story.
The Q was not the first Leica camera I shot with. I think the first one I really had a chance to pick up and shoot with was on this shoot in 2009 with a DP friend that I worked with a lot around that time. He had an if this timeline works out, it was either an M8 or an M9. I'm pretty sure it was his M9 though. And so yeah, I got a chance to shoot with that. Obviously fell in love with that. Before then had been in, other camera brand universe and mostly just like during that period really just focused on the motion aspect too. So fast forward, actually, you know what? A couple years before that, I did actually have a Deluxe 7, one of the little point and shoots.
Nice.
That was pretty
Yeah.
cool. Um, or maybe it was a Deluxe 4. I think they currently Deluxe 7 is the one that's currently out right now.
Sure.
Anywho,
Yes, indeed.
so late 2015, I think, is when the Q was announced or released, and that's when I became, very interested in the concept of what the Q was, which was, full frame, 28, fast, incredible lens, and something that like you could, always keep on you, and that kind of limited. I don't know. I knew by that point I loved the 20 mil to like 35 range, so I knew enough to
Yes.
know that 28 was like the sweet spot. Um, anyway, so yeah, I mean, as soon as I was able to, I put in a pre-order for that. I think I got my Q early 2016 through like a store Miami. I think Josh helped me. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, literally, uh, it's not hyperbole. Every single day since I got that camera, I've used it for something, whether it be
Mm.
working or just having it in the passenger seat, as I drive around, it kind of just stays there with me. It's so easy to take around. So yeah, that's my kind
Absolutely.
of my like a history. And then, starting a couple of years ago with the SL system, started shooting that, really started shooting it more with the SL2. And then I was still shooting my original Q for a little while after I got the SL2, but then upgraded to the Q2 because the sensors are so similar between the SL2 and the Q2. Um,
Sure.
I've had an MP, but I got rid of it, but I want it back. So yeah,
The MP is also an amazing camera. I
yeah.
love your transition from the Q and the Q2, and we're going to look at some of your images here shot with both cameras, starting off with some of your work with the behind the scenes work that you do while you're on set.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of environment these sets are and how do you use the Q in these particular environments?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about the Q is that I can always keep it on me, kind of strapped around me. It's always ready to go. I treat it as a point and shoot unless I need to do something different. And it's very unassuming. You can just spin it around, click it. If you're recording motion, the shutter is so quiet that no sound guys ever get complain to you about shutter sound. And yeah, I mean, like, it's just, it's always nice because in like these environments when you can see the all this camera gack in the right frame that you have to deal with.
Yes,
You want something simple that's going to still give you like top quality, but you don't really want to have to think about it. So
sure,
that's the main use case for the Q for me, is something that like
sure.
I essentially treat as like the highest end point and shoot imaginable, but it's a point and shoot to me. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Could you tell us a little bit more about these images in particular? These are different sets, I imagine.
they're different sets, but from the same show. It was a show I shot for AMC for a couple seasons for Eli Roth, which is the guy on the left hand side of the frame here, who's
Yes.
like a big horror director, and it was kind of a horror documentary that aired yeah, for a couple seasons. And so the one on the left was during some like it was like it wasn't the title sequence to the show, but it was one of the first things that you would see is kind of a little couple sweeps of Eli before he started talking and introducing things. So yeah, just it was kind of like the lighting setup that we had there. That's the thing too. I think I was talking to you about this at some point, that like that's the nice thing about having a Q or any camera with you in these environments, is that you're not always in a situation in which you have professional production designers and gaffers and lighting equipment
Right.
and cool subjects and everything at your disposal. I mean, so this is a chance to kind of piggyback on all of that and get some really cool images. And
Absolutely.
the producers like it too, because then I hand them a big Dropbox of behind the scenes images that is just kind of icing on the cake for them. Um,
Yes.
yeah. And so image on the right is my friend Sam, who I've worked with for years. He's a camera operator. And yeah, there was like a 4 camera sort of shoot here. It was like a round table shoot. Sam was wearing his cool grandfather's Dodgers jacket.
Yes.
He'll break out from time
I
to
love
time.
this shot.
Yeah.
It's
Um,
amazing.
so yeah, I love that. And that's another thing too, is like it's it's a conversation piece on set. I mean, so many directors or producers or camera people have cues, so we all kind of talk about them and
Mm.
shoot each other with them. And yeah, it's just a cool way to get pictures of your friends while working.
And with the Q3, we have substantial video upgrades. We'll talk about that a little bit
Hmm.
later. I'm sure that also helps with maybe behind the scenes of these kinds of shoots, where you want
Yeah.
to showcase the actors working together, or maybe the teams that are setting up the cameras.
Hmm.
It seems like it's such a really powerful camera and it's such a compact size that you can fit anywhere. I see many images of you just kind of having the strap around your shoulder, always ready to go. It seems like that's exactly what you use it for.
Yeah, I guess also to the point of like working with the kind of existing lighting that's on set. A lot of times with how sensitive motion cameras are now, and how high we rate them, either at 800 or sometimes at 2500 now.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of light on set, so low light
Mm.
performance comes you know into play there. So, and having a fast lens that's sharp, wide open, having some optical stabilization, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of needed. Yeah.
Absolutely. Here's an example of this here with, I believe this from A Ghost Story, the movie.
Yep.
Um, and, very low light situation with light bouncing
Mhm.
off the walls. I love the shot on the left. We have just kind of a general feel of the set. I love watching and looking at behind the scenes images where you can really see how, the director and the team decides to shoot something based on the situation that they're in. And I love the fact that with the wide angle lens, you get the whole shot. You see the lighting, you see the subject entering the room. And then on the right-hand side here, we see looking through, was it the director's viewfinder?
Mhm.
And kind of setting up a different kind of perspective, but still doing the behind the scenes that you're so good at.
Well, I mean, for example, like on the left, that's just so useful for anybody who's interested in lighting, whether you're a photographer, cinematographer, anything, just because like, even 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago when I was in college, like there was just not the wealth of behind the scenes content. Um,
Sure.
and what there was so unapproachable because it's like, you know, it's from the last, 30, 40 years of big budget movies that you see, behind the scenes stills from, and it just seems so far away from what you can accomplish. But like this is, a movie that did pretty well that we lit, pretty much entirely with these little light matte LED panels, which you can kind of see here.
Hmm.
And we, there was too much light to actually shine it directly on the character in this scene. Like you can see how it's bounced
Mm.
off the walls to spread it out, but also to like get the light level down. So yeah, it's just, it's helpful to me too to like remember what I did in the past so that,
Yeah.
I can go back and reference behind the scenes photos and jog my brain about like what might be a good approach for an upcoming job, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
That's a great point. So, I'm sure that you do a lot of scouting, and I'm sure this camera is fantastic for that, where you can just very quickly show an environment and how the light is
Hmm.
bouncing around the room and what would be needed to complete that shot. That's a very good point.
I really like the Q as a scouting camera too because it like I'll be tempted sometimes to bring my SL2 with like a 24 to 90 or 24 to 70 or something like that so I can like get the full
Sure.
range of lenses that we could potentially use. But like I don't necessarily always like showing people what what exactly it'll look like even because you can't
Mm,
really. You don't have all the pieces
right.
there. So I almost use the Q as like, oh, this is an opportunity to get some cool pictures in like a lower pressure situation. I'll also collect some info about the room so I can remember it later. That's something I could do on my phone too, but who knows? Um, and then yeah, I'm not giving too much away on the day. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And if you were in a situation where you want to go back to a scene and, let me see what kind of lighting I had, you could always
Hmm.
zoom in with the extra resolution and see exactly what's
Yes.
going on if you
Yeah.
want to, but you don't have to provide all that data if you don't want to, which is fantastic.
Yep. Yep. Totally.
I want to transition over to your portraits. And with the Q system, we have this beautiful lens, a 28 millimeter 1.7. And I feel like a lot of people don't use the 28 for a portrait lens. They usually use it for landscape or architectural work because it is more of a wide angle lens, but you seem to really enjoy it for portraiture. Can you tell a little bit more about your thought process of using the Q and photographing people?
Yeah, I love it because it's, I mean, you get added context to the frame, so it's just more information. It's more inherently cinematic when you have more information. I think you can. I mean, it's worth a lot more words when you have more it to the frame, but you also have a fast lens that you can still create separation with. So I don't know. It works at many different distances, but I feel like there's something about like this lens wide open at like say a foot and a half to maybe 5 feet away that just has like
Hmm.
this magical combination of fall off bit information, field of view, um, everything. Yeah. So I love shooting portraits on a 28. I think it's I don't know. I think it should be considered a standard portrait lens in the same way that like an 85 is too. It's like they're both a decision. Whereas like I get
Right.
kind of bored between 35 is cool too, but I get kind of bored between 40 and 85 for portraiture. It's just not it's neither here nor there to me. Plus as you say too, it's like I mean especially with the Q2 and then the Q3 when you have this increased resolution you can still shoot wide open, still capture that fall off, but when you start to hit 35 or 50, you still have some fall off. And a lot of times, like if I'm shooting, like if I'm purposefully shooting portraiture on an SL2 with like a 24 to 90, I'm doing that at like f4 to f8, like or something like that.
Mm,
I'm not exactly, or I'm not necessarily shooting the lens wide open. So you can shoot this 28 at 1.7 crop to 35, 50, even beyond that, and still get some fall off and get kind of the same amount of fall off that you would get in a lot of like common portraiture situations with a longer lens. Um,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. That's a question I'm seeing in the chat here. Do you use the crop modes for portraits?
I I do sometimes to kind of preview what what it would look like in a crop, like what my field of view would be, but I also can kind of do the slight calculation in my head. It's like if I'm trying to be really precise with framing and I know I'm going to crop it to like 35, then I will pop up the frame lines. But
Hmm.
I always personally just shoot DNGs, and so you get the full field of view and everything. So I don't personally use that feature a lot while shooting. The only time I do is, and we can get into this later, is more in like architectural situations where I'm trying to use that 28 mil to get some like detail of a building that's like maybe across the street or something. And I know
Sure.
I don't want the road and I don't want the sky. I just want the texture of the building. That's more the situation where I'll purposefully use the crop mode. Um, but I just love shooting portraiture at 28 so much that I don't really do that very often. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's an amazing lens for, like you mentioned, environmental portraiture, where you're
Hmm.
bringing the subject into a place, and the place plays a part in the storytelling of
Yeah.
that shot. With a 35, 50 or longer, you're focusing on the subject. Whereas, in your images right here, I love the shadow details that we're getting off the building right here. I
Hmm.
love the flowers around Ryan.
Hmm.
It's just such a complementary element to your portraiture that really brings out the qualities of your subjects. And I feel like you can maybe not only do that with the 28, but 28 lends itself naturally to those types of shots.
It does. And like, I mean, it's the old thing where there's two schools of thought. Like you put a prime lens on a camera and you move your feet, or you put a zoom lens and you twist your wrist to get different field of view. And I don't know, I think I could see I can kind of see the argument for 35 in certain situations, but 28 to me is just, maybe it's because I've just shot so much with the Q that I can kind of make it work. Um, for me, but I don't know. I think you couldn't uh get what we're seeing here. I mean, you could back up a little bit and get that same frame
Sure.
on a 35, but I mean, I'm still within the personal space of the subject. We're still talking and it's still getting wide, and then I can come up to him close. I don't know. I think it's just so versatile, the 28.
And I totally agree with you. I think, in the next couple of shots that we're going to see here with your portraits, you do get close to your subjects. And
Hmm.
having such a smaller, compact system, I'm sure helps with that relationship that you have with your subjects, where you're talking to them, you're asking them to maybe move
Yeah.
their head, to move their body. And if it was a bigger system, maybe they would feel more uncomfortable or not
Hmm.
quite willing to do the things that you're doing, that you're asking. And like the example on the right hand side here, where you're very close to your subject, and I love with that 1.7 aperture, you get that beautiful depth of field. The
Hmm.
face is of course in focus, but then the body is slowly kind of dissolving into that background. I really love the performance of this lens and the sensor combined to make this depth of field shot here.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever shot another shot that shows the quality of fall off at that distance of this lens.
Mm,
And like like I don't know, you just don't see portraiture like that as often as I think you should. There's just it's so cool. Yeah, no, this was a situation too where it's like I did not go into this night planning on getting this shot. We were kind of busy shooting the motion version of it, and it's just, if you have the camera on you, you can quickly whip it around, find focus and grab a couple shots, and it's not a huge thing. It doesn't have a big clunky shutter. It's, you're not sticking a big lens in somebody's face. It's very, very disarming, very unassuming, and yeah.
That's awesome. And I feel like that those ideas translate with the left-hand shot with your wife Joy here.
Hmm.
I'm sure you weren't planning about the lighting. You're working with lights from a restaurant here, and it works great. It really feels
Yeah.
like it's something that just happened on the street very organically. I feel the 28 millimeter also plays a part in that more natural, organic feel of these images.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you get all the quality of like the last light of day, the street lights starting to come on, the neon, the context. It's you kind of start to gravitate in portrait ratio on a 28 to putting the head kind of center, maybe just above the center of frame, and just getting this like kind of sucking in perspective.
Hmm.
Yeah, I tend to do that one a lot. But yeah, I just love all the info that you get here. And also it's like I think another thing too is like I shoot like I basically with the Q, I keep it set to 1.7 unless I need anything deeper. That way I get the, fastest shutter speed that I can in any given situation. I usually keep the shutter on auto.
Hmm.
I'll keep the ISO on auto, and with the Q and Q2 I've capped it at 1600, but
Hmm.
I've still done that with the Q3 just out of habit, but I think I can with the BSI sensor, I can get away with a lot more than that. Um,
Sure.
and I guess my point being for this left-hand frame, keeping when you're shooting stills, keeping auto white balance on in funky, mixed color temperature situations like this is really handy for speeding up post because it'll give you some automatic, plus minus green, and it'll just kind of set your white point in a place that you can immediately get to grading the image rather than trying to find that white balance and then starting to grade it.
Right.
um yeah, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this touches upon a question in the chat here. What is your standard setting for white balance, AWB or other? We talked a little bit about that before meeting on for the Leica Conversations about white balance for video, but for
Yeah,
photography, are there specific settings that you like to use with the Q system?
if I'm just walking around with it, or if I'm just gathering BTS shots, or in any situation where it's not like I'm specifically shooting a scene that's going to have a lot of different um frames, or a lot of something that needs to stay consistent between, I'll just shoot in auto white balance. And then if it's like a situation where I'm shooting with flash, or it's I'm shooting a scene that needs to stay tungsten or daylight, then I will set it. Or I'll just usually just go into the Kelvin setting and just dial it in to what looks good to the room, and
Sure.
not really worry about plus minus green in that situation. Because that's one of those things that you can, if you have that one variable consistent, like if you set the Kelvin to a certain thing, you can go in, adjust your, plus minus, and then copy and paste that to the subsequent images afterwards. And then
Right.
that'll be that's 30 seconds instead of 0 seconds. It's not too bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And especially for the situations where maybe you're doing the behind the scenes on set where the lighting doesn't change that much, the temperature
Hmm.
doesn't change that
Yeah.
much, that can be very useful to kind of spill out a bunch of images all at once when you're editing. Just
Well,
one last thing you have to think about.
yeah, that's really true too. Cause like there's, I don't know that, well, when you are setting everything to tungsten or daylight on set, and you have a bunch of funky mixed color temperatures, and maybe the camera starts to get a little confused about what it should be referencing, I will a lot of times set it to whatever the motion camera is set to. That way it stays consistent, and it looks like I lit it for, or if it's a daylight scene, um it stays daylight. Yeah.
Amazing. We're going to transition over here to architecture work with the Q system. I would love for you to speak a little bit about the settings that you use for architecture work. I mean, I think that the 20mm lends itself very nicely to photographing buildings and architecture, but how do you achieve these images?
Yeah, I mean, almost all of anything architecture I do is just because I have the camera with me at all times, and I just happen to, be somewhere by accident that's cool. I take a picture of it. So like the one on the left is on a family vacation, and then the one on the right is this the restaurant in there is called Vespertine. It's in Culver City. I think it's called the Waffle Building. Um, but it's just a place that I would go every time I'm in that part of town. I'll go shoot a shot of this building. But yeah, I mean
Incredible.
that's a I know it's really cool. That's a situation in which I will probably stop down a little bit, just to get a little bit deeper. I mean, I can't see a reason why I would not shoot at f8 for these, or 5.6 or something like that, just to make sure that um everything is sharp that you're seeing.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, on the right-hand side,
yeah.
we see like little droplets of water for the bottom of the building,
Oh yeah.
on the orange, and like stuff like that. Those
Hmm.
little details I
Yeah.
feel really make the image, where you're consumed by the geometry and the movement of the building. But then as you look at the details, you also have the highlights and the shadows and how those elements transition, and then texture, water, to add to all of that together as well.
Yeah, and that image on the right is one of my favorite shots to print. It's just it looks so bold,
Mm,
printed, and yeah, it's all that detail that you wouldn't get. I mean, you probably still would get at 1.7 from the distance I was.
mhm.
'Cause I bet you anything too. This was probably cropped in, at least to 35 mil.
Yep.
There's definitely some croppage on there.
Amazing. Let's talk about landscapes now. Brett, I love your landscapes, and you do a lot of different variety with your landscapes. We have an image on the left where our horizon line is nice in the middle, and yet the sun flares coming in, but you have all this detail in the foreground. And then on the right-hand side, this is a little more contemplative landscape, in my opinion, where it's all about the textures. It's all about how the light is gently hitting these is this clay, I guess? It's where
It,
were you for these two shots?
the one on the right is in Death Valley National Park, and
Mm,
it's actually like it's in the Mesquite Flat sand dunes area. So, those big kind of, beautiful brown, sweeping sand dunes. But like on the edges of it, there'll be this dried clay that I guess is probably underneath all that sand. And
sure.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to what we were talking about with portraiture, where you have the same lens, just trained on, slightly different field of view, and you get completely different, but completely equally viable, you know, imagery. So yeah, no. So the one on the right is in Death Valley, and then the one on the left is a place called Hot Creek Geological Site that is near
Mm,
Mammoth Lakes in California, and it's like the most fish in the barrel landscape thing ever. I've been to this spot probably 10 different times because it's just so easy to get a cool image there. It's kind of all there.
yes,
Um, yeah, I mean, I try to like, for better or worse, I try to make sure there's like three or four separate, like kind of interesting things happening in any given image just to make it feel like there's a point to taking the photo.
sure.
And this kind of has it built in. so, so
Yeah, I
it's a
mean,
cool one. Yeah.
I love what you mentioned about, it's really interesting that these are shot with the same lens.
Yeah.
I would have never guessed it unless,
Mhm.
there is, if you look closely, there is that wide angle nature on the right-hand side, but the fact that you can get close, you can shoot things that are far away, the
Mhm.
depth of field that you get with that right-hand shot as well. I love that. That's something that I feel like a lot of people don't think about for landscapes is, I feel most people will stop down for landscapes. They'll go to
Yeah.
5.6, maybe f8. But no, you can definitely focus on the details and have that beautiful transition between the in focus areas and the out of focus areas be part of your composition as well. I love how you kind of the clay kind of just disappears as you move up your eyes to that right image in the right frame. It's really, really striking.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell um, like how big the field of view in that frame is. I only know because I kind of like can remember, and I also kind of like know what the fall off is at a certain distance, just shooting this lens so much. But I mean,
Yeah,
it's you're seeing maybe 5 feet, in front of you there.
sure.
It's not a big thing, but it's cool too because I mean that I'm sure there's probably other cool crops within that image that you could use. You could even like if you shot that on the Q3, I think that was shot on the Q1, but
Mhm.
um, yeah, if you shot that on the Q3, I mean, you could get deep in there and get some texture, and that would be a whole different thing within the same frame.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can, yeah, zoom in as much as you want. We'll talk
Yeah.
about color grading when we get to the Q3 as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Another image, and speaking about color grading, this is, I believe, shot with the Q2.
Mhm.
Just very striking colors right off the bat here. I love how your eye just goes directly toward the person in the frame on the right image there with the yellow shirt. complementing the other colors of the mountains. Can you tell me a little bit more about how this shot was made?
Yeah, so this is at a place called Artist Palette within Death Valley National Park. It does not look like this to eye.
Hmm.
It's there, the color is there, but this is definitely a situation where I brushed on some um selective, saturation and vibrance just to bring out the quality of it. I mean, I'm a very big proponent of make the image that you want. Don't try to represent reality unless that's your job. So
Yes.
this is punched up quite a bit, but I think it's like, I mean, it's so much more striking than if I just showed the bland image of what it is, which it's, striking in and of itself, but it can be so much more. So anywho, but yeah, I mean, same thing. Like there's probably, a dozen different croppings of these two images that you could do that you could still have something viable and cool and fun out of.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, the one on the right, it's like another example of 28, kind of it's like the environmental portraiture on a 28 taken to its logical extreme. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yes. And I think it showcases how much you can push these files. You mentioned
Hmm.
how this is something where this is not what it looks like in real life, but as artists, as photographers, we can choose whatever we want. We have the raw file, we have all
Hmm.
these amazing tools in post, and the world's kind of our oyster. We can decide to make things more or less the vision that we're looking for. And I love the fact that that's possible with such a small compact camera.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the quality that you're getting out of these files is equal to anything. And if you capture the information, I mean, that's you're capturing it at the highest possible quality that you can, but it's raw material for you to finish out in post. It's not meant to just come out of camera and be exactly perfect. It can be something very, very good, but spend 10 minutes with it and it's going to be 100 times better than
Hmm.
what you started with. Yeah.
Absolutely. I really think that post production is half of photography because you have so
Hmm.
much freedom to go and crop in, to change the colors, the contrast, the exposure.
Yep.
Of course, it starts with an image, but you give an image to three different photographers, you may have three different outcomes
Yeah,
in post, and I think that's really exciting.
for sure. Love it.
Now, I think that this is one of my favorite landscape shots from you, Brett. We'll talk about how you did this in a moment, but some of the details I'd like to point out is, of course, we have the lightning coming down onto the ground here. On the right-hand side, you will see a horse as well
Mhm.
in the scene. I really think it locks in this image. Brett, can you tell me a bit more about how you got this shot? Because it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so this was on the set of that movie A Ghost Story in kind of mid 2016. This was on the original Q. And we were out in Meridian, Texas, filming the scenes of the kind of pioneer era of the story. And big storm rolled in, and we kind of temporarily got under the pop-up tents. I think we eventually went inside, but this was just us kind of waiting out the rain for a second, and I was
Hmm.
just trying to grab some cool frames. The horse that was in the scene was still in the frame, and I just happened to get extremely lucky with this lightning strike because we were talking the other day, Nathan. And I was like, I have to go back and like think like how is this done? Because I wasn't, doing any slow shutter speed. This was not an expected thing to happen. I just happened to have the camera on me.
Right.
And yeah, I looked it up and it was at 1,600 shutter speed. So uh it
That's
was just,
incredible.
I mean, the lightning was probably in the sky there for like a half a second. So I
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
because
I
normally what you
had
would
a
do for this
little chance, but
is
yeah.
you would do a long exposure because you have no
Yeah.
idea when the lightning's going to hit. You don't know where it's going to hit, but you just pointed the camera at the sky and took a shot, and that shutter speed was enough to capture the light hitting from the sky. It's
Yeah, and I'm
incredible.
sure also the lens was at 1.7 too, so it was probably in electronic shutter mode. It was
Hmm.
above 2000 if we were outside. Yeah, got lucky on that one.
Amazing. And did you do any kind of cropping or anything like that to reframe the
I
image, or was
I don't think
this?
it's I think it's a tiny bit like maybe like the horizon line is straightened, but it looks pretty close to 28.
Hmm.
Um I think probably what I did was bring it down a little bit to kind of equalize with the lightning, and then I probably
Sure.
did like a horizontal gradient down low to bring up the grass a little bit,
Yep.
and
Absolutely.
I'm sure I brushed like a little bit of maybe like saturation, contrast, clarity, just a tiny bit into like the sky to like pop the clouds. But yeah, the craziest thing about the shot is the thing that I didn't have to do anything to, uh, just that
Right.
lightning bolt.
It's
Yeah.
it's just absolutely incredible, and a great example of someone who gets ready for the shot. And photography, sometimes you get lucky, and that's
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the magic of photography. It's like you get these moments that most likely will never happen again, and
Well,
such
and
a beautiful
you
frame.
you wanna, like, just decrease the friction between, like, you, like, picking up the camera and you taking the shot. I mean, that might mean decrease the friction between you swinging it around and being able to be ready to, like, capture that thing, or it may mean just decreasing, like, the friction between the association of, like, the camera on the desk versus you, like, getting in the car and going out and shooting. Like, you don't wanna have bad associations with the tools that you use. You wanna be
Sure.
excited to get up and use them. So,
Yes. And I think
yeah.
that the Q system does lend itself really well to being ready for when you're ready.
Mhm.
The aperture, the shutter speed, they're all very easily accessible, the ISO as well. And so if you do have to make an adjustment, it takes a half a second to do so. But most of the time, the camera is ready to go anyway. I mean, you said that this was shot close to being, 1.7, 2.8, somewhere around there, and the electronic shutter took over just because of the situation that you're in. It's
Yeah.
really it's amazing that the camera is just as ready as you are. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the camera, whatever is happening inside the camera, it's looking through the lens, the same lens that you are, and it's
Mm,
setting you up for success. I mean, as I said, like, besides, aperture, I keep everything on auto, essentially, and just use the exposure comp dial to, like, dial in to taste by eye, and I mean, it just so happens that most of the time that means being a stop to stop and a half underexposed, just because,
mhm.
like, I know I can, like, bring back out the shadow detail. It has a lot of dynamic range, but it's like it's better to protect a little bit for the highlights, and it just kinda
Sure.
looks a little bit more right to me through the viewfinder that way.
Yep.
Um, but yeah,
I
I
feel the
mean,
same way.
like I said, just decrease, like, the friction between you, like, clicking the shutter. I mean, it kinda drives me nuts because, like, I'll, hand the Q2 to, a lot of things I'll do is I'll hand it to other people on set because it's, like, it's so easy to point and shoot with, so I'll hand it
Yeah.
to a director, I'll hand it to another camera operator or something, and they'll immediately start futzing with the shutter dial or, like, changing settings,
Sure.
and that's fine and all, but it's like, you don't have to do that. Just go and let the camera, like, think for you a little bit, um,
Sure.
collect that information and
Absolutely.
then, do something with it in post, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. There was a question in chat about shooting this camera in challenging weather situations, and these are, I feel, good examples of you shooting out in either rain or it seems like there's some wind going on as well. Can you speak a little bit about your experience shooting the Q system in these environments?
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever purposefully, like, go crazy with, like, just I mean, I don't wanna get wet either, so I'm not
Sure.
gonna yeah, but, yeah, I mean, I've been in the rain many times with the Q and the Q2. Um, the Q, I used to, put a little electrical tape over the mic holes because it just, it felt better to do that.
Sure.
I didn't really do that with the Q2 because it was, it said it was rated for something, I trusted it. And yeah, no, I mean, I've gotten both cameras just soaking wet, and they just continue working as expected or as hoped. Yeah,
If you're
no,
like me, I live in Seattle, so it's raining a lot of the time. And so it's really nice to have a camera that, like you said, is IP52 rated. If it is raining, if there's I go out for a hike or something like that, and a storm does come, surprise us during the hike, it's not a problem. It's just nice to
yeah,
know that, if you're okay with the rain, the camera's also okay with the rain as well. And having that possibility to shoot in these, more challenging situations also allows you, from a creative standpoint, to get that shot of joy there on the left hand side, where
yeah.
you can be a little more creative with, the raindrops on the lens maybe, or the flare and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it'd be fine without it too, but I always, from day one on the Q cameras, on other cameras as well, I'll put a UV filter on the front of the lens and just never
Hmm.
use the cap again. And so it is fun to point the camera up from time to time, like Todd Hito style, and like get some like nasty, raindrops on there, and start shooting people and get that like free texture out of it. Yeah, that's really
Yes,
fun.
absolutely. And I want to speak a little bit about your commercial work as well. You were on the set for the Q2 Ghosts to
Mhm.
create the video and the stills as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience shooting with the Q system in this commercial environment?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest use case for the Q in the commercial environment has been because I have the SL2 and I love shooting in those situations with the SL2 and the 24 to 90, and because I can tether that, and a lot of times I have to shoot tethered because other people need to see the frame while I'm doing it. I'll shoot with the Q as something that's like quick to run around with if like the frame has been set, and I don't want to move the camera too much. Or I'll hand it off to another person who's in charge of like the creative in some way, like either a director or creative director or some another person on the camera team, just so that we can get as many frames while we have access to the location or the talent or whatever, as possible. So yeah, I mean, shooting the Q2 and the SL2 side by side has been, I mean, that's kind of as seamless as you can get. I think they're pretty darn similar sensors. Like I don't know if
Mhm.
they're exactly the same, but they kind of act the same. In post, I can apply the same, base grades to both of them, and they look similar. So yeah, and it's just, again, it's the same as in any other scenario. It's just like the friction is non-existent for shooting with the Q. So you just
Which
yeah.
is what you want on 'cause especially on commercial shoots where, you have talent, you have sets, you have time. In this case, you're working with sunsets where time is
Hmm.
is literally, leaving the set.
Yeah.
Having such a small camera that you can do a professional image right here, and this is, with the shot with the Q2, you can print this up huge at 47 megapixels as well. You can definitely
Well,
use this for a
totally. And that,
billboard or something like that.
and like that's another situation too, where like when we were shooting the Q2 Ghost campaign, we were out in White Sands, New Mexico for a couple days. We really had to maximize our time out there. And it was just so overwhelmingly bright and kind of
Mm.
flat in the middle of the day, which was kind of a cool look, but it was like it wasn't the greatest look, and it was also a pain to be out there. That we really, so often you're shooting when the best light is, which is, the last first or last couple hours of the day. And remember, we were pretty far out on the dunes. We were shooting motion and stills at the same time. I was shooting on my um SL2 as well. But as we're walking back to the car, as things are kind of packed up in the bag, I still had my Q2 out because I knew I could get those last couple like bits of light a little easier with the fast lens and with that focal length, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another thing
And
too. Yeah.
the performance that you're getting, I mean, at 1.7, the sun is behind the subject,
Uh-huh.
and they're wearing a leather dark coat,
Mhm,
which is very hard to expose for considering that the sun is behind the subject. And
mhm.
I love the fact that you just see everything. I mean, there's enough dynamic range that you can just bring all the shadows out if you want to without hindering the direction of the light. It's very clearly behind the subject. It's bouncing on the reflection and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's not distracting. You still see exactly what you need to see, depending on what commercial application you're trying to aim for.
And this is like a situation too where say you point the lens at this scene, it kind of reads I keep it on the exposure setting that takes the full frame into account. Um, and basically you take that exposure comp dial and just dial it down
Right.
till you get kind of a pleasing sky, knowing that you're going to lift the shadows and you're going to lift them like tastefully, so you don't have to push them like crazy hard, but you can lift them
Right.
a bit more than what you maybe are seeing in that live view scenario. So that's another thing too. It's just like repeatedly using the tool over and over and over, figuring out like the things you can get away with, the tricks that you can do in post, the things that you maybe need to supplement on set. Like if I had a bit more, if I had a few more hands while I was doing this, maybe I would have taken a bounce card and just
Sure.
lifted up just catch the sun a little bit and lift them up from the back. So I just had like a moderately cleaner uh, file to work with. But
Sure.
there's so many things you can do. Um, but yeah, I mean that's another thing too. It's like if you're using it for commercial work, if you're using it, in your personal life, if you're using it every day, you get like all of those reps in that know like what to expect out of the files. The more you use it. So yeah.
Amazing. So, Brett, you are one of our brand ambassadors for the Leica Q3, and I would love to hear your first impressions when you received the camera as someone who shot with the Leica Q and then the Leica Q2. What was some of the things that really stood out for you while shooting with the Leica Q3?
Well, the flip screen's amazing. So here's the Q3. Um, yeah, no, the flip screen is like the biggest intuitive difference between it's I mean, it's very much a Q camera. It feels the same. The muscle memory is the same. I know you guys have said that it's like been designed from the millimeter up as a new thing, but it really feels like a Q or a Q2, which is perfect. Um, but yeah, the tilt screen, that's the biggest thing for me because probably 90% of the time I've shot with the Q3, the tilt screen has been, and I completely have forgotten about it. It just, it sucks into the body and you don't think about it. But it's so nice when it's there, like in a situation like this, where you just want a little bit more direct view on the screen. I mean, the Q and the Q2 screen always had a good viewing angle, so it wasn't like a huge issue. And like focus wise, just a quick digression, like I'll almost always shoot field focus and just move around with the D-pad or the joystick. And
Sure.
so as long as I can kind of see where that focus point is and I can generally see the image, I could still shoot without the tilty screen, but this just makes it a little bit easier. Um and yeah, I mean, beyond that, I mean, it's the sensor is the really the huge thing when getting. I mean, I shot it in the same manner in which I shoot the Q and the Q2, which is just basically underexposed by a stop, do all the things I normally do, but the flexibility of the files and like the cleanliness of them um under the same conditions that I kind of would know what to expect from the file. It's a huge thing, and I kind of had to. I mean, I kind of knew what BSI meant to a certain extent, but like to intuitively experience what it means, um, it's huge. It makes me want an SL2S. I've been shooting with the SL2 and I love it, and it's great. But like, I know that has a BSI sensor as well, and
Indeed.
it helps. It helps a huge amount.
Absolutely. And especially in situations like this where we are shooting in lower light conditions, and I'm sure that the light being used is not white balance, but you still get this
Mhm.
very pleasing selection of colors. You're just getting a lot of data off of that sensor for you to move around. And we'll talk about, utilizing these files in post and how malleable these files are. But one of the things that I discovered is just the combination of having the tilt screen for these, in this perfect example right here, where you want to get low. There's sometimes it's just better to photograph someone down low to showcase, the grandeur, or to set a different kind of perspective. And, having the camera, having that tilt screen allows you to do it just that much easier. We talked about how you don't want that friction. And I think that this is a great example of not having friction, where you want to shoot down low and get that shot without, kind of yourself falling into the river, without that screen.
Well, I mean, too, it's just like, it adds one more piece of interest to the shot. It gives you one more reason that that's a frame worth taking and showing to other people. I mean, if I would have shot this same shot, a foot or two higher, it just wouldn't have been as special. And that's really what it's all about. It's a matter of inches. It's a matter of millimeters. You shoot a bunch of photos and you start to see what works and what's cool and what makes the image kind of click into place. And sometimes that means getting in a spot that is not like super comfortable to be in, to physically shoot in.
Sure.
I mean, to another point too, like when you're shooting, say in a tethered environment, or an environment where you're repeatedly getting versions of the same image, because, performance or wardrobe is being adjusted. I mean, at a certain point, you in commercial environment, you kind of set the image, you set the lighting, and then you kind of step back a little bit. Like you just actuate the shutter. But sometimes you're at an angle that's not super comfortable to be in for a while. So just having the option to like tilt that screen and, keep your back straight is nice too.
Yeah. Relax a little bit. Yeah.
And another thing too that I thought of is like a lot of times when you're like sitting across from somebody at like a diner or a restaurant or something, and you want to get just a little bit of that foreground into play, just because it makes it a more interesting image. Like being able to just like go down just a little lower, kind of suck it into your gut, and then like look down, like a waist level finder. I don't know. It's just kind of like it's pretty specific use case, but it's one that you kind of find yourself in a lot in social situations. Yeah.
This right here, I mean, for street photography, there are a lot of people that like to shoot that kind of waist level shots, and having the ability to have the tilt screen and not yourself get on, your knees to get that angle as you walk, as you discover, as things are moving around. I mean, that's just another added benefit for you to get that composition that you're looking for without you physically trying to, I mean, because you're definitely bringing attention to yourself if all of a sudden you get down to your knees to get a shot. But if you're just walking behind somebody, I feel this is a much easier way to get this shot right here.
Well, like, yeah, that's a perfect example too, because like I spotted this guy's shirt like a block away from me, and I kind of like caught up to him a little bit and just walked behind him and kept just shooting. I don't do a lot of like street photography, but if it's something like this and there's something that's like interesting enough to warrant, creeping on a person for a couple blocks, then I'll do it. But yeah, no, this was a situation where I didn't really feel like putting the camera up to my eye. I kind of just wanted to keep it down low and just keep, clicking the shutter over and over, and knowing that focus point was hitting the back of his shirt and I was getting a workable image. Yeah, and this is probably, I think this is an image too where it's like because we were both walking, I knew I had to keep the shutter speed up to a certain extent or I just have nothing to work with. So I probably underexposed it quite a bit just to get that shutter speed, but it was probably at 1600 or 3200. And it was right on the edge of like what would give me a sharp image. So it was maybe 1/160th or 2/50th or something like that. Yeah, but it's like all those little parts coming into play to make it a usable image. I need to experiment though with like higher ISOs because I just have a bad habit of 1600 and below, but I know 32 is probably good. 64 is probably good too.
Yes. I've made some tests myself, and I'm very satisfied with even 6,400. If my intention was to print a little bit bigger, and,
Hmm.
in my experience, it's the combination between our 1.7 Summilux lens and the stabilization and this
Yeah.
backside illuminated sensor that allows for a lot better low light performance. And a lot of times, what I will do in a shot like this, for example, where instead of going to the next ISO value, what I'll do is that I'll underexpose the image.
Yeah.
And with this backside illuminated sensor, there's just so much data in these images right here that it's not a problem. You just bring everything back in post and you're good to go, without sacrificing the dynamic range when you go up to those higher ISOs.
Hmm.
I really love this shot. This is shot at actually wide open at 1.7 aperture. And
Hmm.
the amount of detail you get at 1.7 aperture, I know that there were some people that were concerned that since we're using the same lens on the Q, on the Q2, and now on the
Hmm.
Q3, would there be any kind of loss of quality? And as many of the people in the chat know, Leica lenses are really designed to be future-proof. And so when we design the lens, they're really designed to be at the height of its performance, even wide open. And I think that, you putting this on a 60 megapixel sensor really showcases how good this 20 millimeter Summilux really is.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's not a huge surprise because like I always kind of felt like the 24 of the original Q was just not even coming close to what the lens could handle, and then that was confirmed with the Q2, and then it's just like, of course it's going to be great wide open. And that's not a super new thing. Like I have a like a R set from the late 90s that I'll shoot on my SL2 a lot, and I'll shoot on different motion cameras, and those are extremely high quality for being I mean it shouldn't be a huge surprise, but they're still getting to be 30 years old.
Sure,
So yeah,
absolutely.
it's been it's been a goal for a while, it seems.
And here's another example of using the tilt screen. If you're in a
Hmm.
situation when you want to point down from a skyscraper, you can do it, I guess, in a safer manner with the tilt
Yes.
screen and seeing exactly
Exactly.
what's going on instead of pointing the camera directly down. I thought that this was just a great showcase of the performance, again, of this lens. You can see, I'm going to use my mouse right here, but right here, like the little lights that are with the people here, these are actually cell phones. People looking
That's
at their cell phone
wild.
down here. It's just unbelievable how much resolution this lens has, but how much resolution the sensor has as well, with now 60 megapixels. Those little details, I don't think a Q2 could be able to see it. It's just too small, and now with 60 megapixels, you can dive in to these very small parts of the image. It's really fun.
Well, that's a fun thing too, because like I definitely haven't zoomed into this image this much as you have here. So I haven't seen any of that. I just think it's like the lines are cool on the full scale. But that, I mean, again, that's the fun of printing these images too, is that I mean, you can physically walk up to them and squint your eyes and see things that you never saw before.
Absolutely. I love the shot as well. If people in the chat can find where Bret is to take this image.
Mhm.
Again, another example of using the tilt screen. This was in New York. This is an installation, I believe, in New York.
Yeah, it's at this place called it's called Summit One, I think the installation is, and it's in the Vanderbilt building. Um, and yeah, so it's pretty close to Grand Central, and I think you can. It's kind of cool because you can see the shot that we were looking at previously. It's kind of that building is near this building. You can look up and you can see these couple stories in that building that are just like completely mirrored on every surface. Um, yeah, very
Yeah.
Instagrammy sort of spot, but it's cool.
It's amazing. Yeah. I mean, with again the 60 megapixel sensor, you can just dive in to any
Yeah,
part of the image. Because we're working with mirrors, you can create really interesting compositions. But I love the fact that you have to zoom in that much to find to find where you were in the shot. And
yeah.
that's also really fun. Here's an image that I would love to spend a little bit more time on, and speaking specifically about the malleability of the Q3 files. Right, if you're like me, I love to push these files, and
Mhm.
these files can be pushed very aggressively. And as many of the people in the chat know, this is the Guggenheim Museum in New York. The lighting is not like this, but you want to make it a little more interesting. So could you tell us a little bit more about the process of taking these images, put them in post, and really stretching the files to get this kind of look?
Yeah, like so the Guggenheim when you shoot it, it's like you just want to turn the camera into like monochrome mode because that's just the way that it kind of looks the best. It's just kind of I don't know, it's just set up for black and white. In color, it kind of falls flat in a way. It's just a little too lucid. It's a little too much what it is. So yeah, in this situation, I got these images into Lightroom and I was like, kind of boring. Then you start playing around with, going up and down on the exposure, just seeing what's in the file essentially. And then, setting that to something that's maybe a bit more interesting. I kind of keyed in on this guard that was across the way. He was just like a thing that sucked your eye in and gave the image some grounding and kind of made it, again, it's one of those things. It's like, is this an image worth spending your time working on? Is this an image worth sharing, et cetera, et cetera? But then, yeah, I mean, from there, I mean, I have some like presets that I've saved from past grades that I'll kind of go through and flip through and see if there's anything interesting. But a lot of times, um, I might go to one of those base grades and then I'll go into like the secondary panel um in Lightroom with with the colors and say, oh well, this value maybe that's skewing because I had the white balance set to something that was a little warmer. Maybe I can bring that even further. Maybe I can take that and push those lights orange, and then maybe anything that's hitting above a certain IRE or however you want to measure it, like maybe that can skew more blue, and so you have a color contrast that maybe wasn't there inherently, or maybe it was there a little bit, and then you're just enhancing it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess another cool thing is that I wish we had the like original file because it's so much brighter than what we're seeing here that it's cool
Mm.
seeing what's retained in the file, how the gradients hold up. And that was a thing too, where I started to like you can if you're previewing it here, like we're seeing it here, you see some blockiness to the gradients because it's just the way, zoom compression is. But in Lightroom, when I was seeing the full quality, I was like, well, this looks like it's breaking apart a little bit. This is kind of annoying. But then I kind of like inspected it closer and looked at the original file, and it was just like the uh the way the paint was touched up.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was making the splotchiness. It was actually very clean. Um, so that's a situation too where you can make some creative choices and say, oh, I want to heal this or I want to copy this just to clean up the image. Because really, at the end of the day, all that matters is like, unless you're a photojournalist and you need to recreate, reality one to one, like make the image that you want to make, like go heal the people out that you don't want in the shot, take a window that you don't like what's outside of it and, you know, uh, get rid of the stuff. It's
Yeah.
just make the imagery that you want to make. But that would only be possible in this situation if I just like if I that's only possible when I have the flexibility that I get with files that are this high quality.
Mm.
Because I didn't purposefully light this. I didn't take the time to like expose it just absolutely perfectly either. I mean, I exposed it for a completely different idea. Um, just happened to be able to make something cool out of it afterward.
And
Yeah.
you're pushing these files, pretty intensely, and yet you have these beautiful gradients on the
Hmm.
wall. It is a different color. You're working with orange, but you're getting this beautiful transition between the yellows and the oranges. I love the transition between the kind of blue to purple that we see on the kind of the railing that we see in front of us here with all the paint and stuff. I mean, those
Hmm.
transitions, the luminosity values are still there. So it's
Yeah.
it's really interesting that you can push it but the base image with all of the different complexities that's going on in the shot is still readily available for you to either accentuate or take away. It's really, as you said, a very malleable file coming off the Q3 here.
Yeah, I mean, we're used to like malleability with luminosity, but it's like the malleability with greater color depth is what's
Mm,
really a lot of fun, because like a lot of the things that I like to do are to, take something that's we're used to seeing as a certain type of blue or something like that, and just skewing it, maybe a bit more teal or a bit more purple or bits outside of like the what our brains think of as reality, and that just creates
mm,
this kind of like, I mean, as we've talked about, you and me, like what 24 frames per second does versus 60 frames per second, it just creates a barrier between you and the image that heightens it in a way that wouldn't be if you didn't have that, like maybe sort of arbitrary, artifice. I don't know. You know what I mean?
yep, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And actually, we're going to touch upon video in just a moment, but before that, I love to quickly touch upon the macro. I've been having a lot of fun using the 60 megapixel sensor in combination with macro to get even closer to my subjects than ever before. We could get already very close with the macro and 47 megapixels, but at 60 megapixels, I mean, you're just seeing details that, like the scratches on the bezel, the
Mhm.
little dust in the vinyl, like little stuff like that, that I feel like really bring out the textural elements of the subject matter that you're shooting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in like, I guess this specific use case, if you were hired to do, um, watch shots for a watch brand or something like this, you're gonna need the, ability to get in there and see the details, and you can for sure do that with this lens. So you can do your sort of lifestyle stuff and your product shots on the same camera.
And you can crop in. I mean, with 60 megapixels, if
Big
you don't
time.
want
Yeah.
to have a certain part of the image, it's not a problem.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So we're going to enter a conversation on the topic of video. For those who don't know, the Q3 has some pretty big advancements when it comes to video. For the first time, we have 8K video, which is what you're seeing right now. This was shot in the 8K setting. We also have 4K 60. The Q2 was able to shoot at 4K 30, so having more frames at our disposal for a smoother video. But what we're seeing right here is the grading process. So for the first time on our Q system, we have log, we have LUTs that we can use at our disposal. Bret, I would love for you to take over as a cinematographer and tell us a little bit about your experience shooting with the Q3, specifically speaking about video here.
Yeah. So I mean, 8K is that's a lot of resolution. That's more resolution than you're ever going to deliver at anytime in the foreseeable future. But like, it kind of acts the same as the 60 megapixel like croppability. Like you can go out, you can shoot these sort of landscape establishing b-roll shots, and you can have that croppability factor, which is huge. You can get a
Mm,
couple different looks within the same lens. I mean, a huge use case for me with the Q3 and video going forward is going to be when I'm, say shooting a documentary or something, and I don't want to have to lug a big camera and big sticks around, just to get, a lot of these establishing shots or these texture shots. I can just go around with the Q3. It's gonna have, it's gonna be recording a log file, so it's gonna, be gradable. In the same way that maybe the A cam is, and it's yeah, I mean it's pretty phenomenal the quality you get out of this. And then when you jump down to 4K, well, a huge thing that's nice is that there's no sensor crop, because that's a thing that's a big pain with motion cameras. Is a lot of time you get stuck with a certain high resolution if you want to use the full sensor readout,
mm,
and any smaller resolutions that you might go down to either to save space or to be able to go up to higher frame rates. You're going to end up having a sensor crop. You're going to be cropping in on your image, and you're going to have different, field of view and depth of field characteristics because of that. This still reads out the full sensor at 4K, and then you can uh, record even higher, bit depth in that mode, and also record, like you said, up to 60 frames per second, which I'm not really interested in terms of playing it back at 60. I'm more interested in recording that to slow it down to play at 24.
Sure.
Although it's great to have that ability. It's great to have any flexibility. You want to have the options. But yeah, no, I mean the sensor acts the same as it does, in the photo mode. It's malleable. It works really well. It's easy to grade. And the tilty screen is huge. I see this also being used on gimbals for sure.
Sure.
Maybe not like huge, like basically what I want to do is be able to just put it on a DJI RS3 and have nothing else on there, have no other monitors, no anything, just use the tilty screen to get it, facing towards me the way I want, and not have to think about all the other junk that you have to do to, rig up a camera on even a small gimbal like that. So it's maybe, I don't know. I mean, I've used the SL2 and SL2S for video, but I might end up using the Q3 like much more for video, just because of like what it brings to the table.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And now with the addition of ports, so the Q3 has USB-C and HDMI. USB-C is great to charge a camera when you're in these environments in the field. You want to connect it to a external charger, for example, or a battery. But for HDMI, you can use an external recorder. That was one of the questions in the chat here. If you want to have even higher bit depth, HDMI is great. You can then see it maybe on a bigger screen and record it at the same time. Now, you don't have to have an external recorder to get the highest quality out of it. It's able to shoot 4K 60 at 10-bit 422 to a memory card. And that is with the help of the new processor that has 8 gigabytes of buffer memory. But there's a lot of people that just like to have a bigger screen to work with when they're shooting video.
I have this small HD Cine 7 here, and it's not an external recorder. It's just I use it on any camera that I use, just to view, and that way you can take advantage of any exposure tools you have in here. I mean, there's peaking and exposure or focus assist and everything on the the camera itself, but this gives you just a little bit bigger image. I probably wouldn't put a 7-inch monitor on the Q. I would go for the 5.
Sure.
But regardless, like that totally would be a good setup. Yeah, and it outputs, I think it outputs 1080. It's not any lower than 1080. It might be even higher output for the HDMI. So it's super sharp. You see all the details. Yeah, and then
working with 10-bit. I mean, just a lot of color information in the file for you to extract, and there's also embedded LUTs inside the camera if you want a specific look that Leica can suggest for you. But if you have your own LUTs that you like to use to have a different look, you can import custom LUTs. And there's a lot of people that enjoy kind of seeing what the final image will look like in the field before they go into a post-processing setup.
For sure, because if you're not in a news gathering situation, or a something that's maybe a industrial thing, if you're in something that it needs a little bit more panache, like the client usually wants to see something that's not just a Rec 709 conversion, but that has a little bit of a approximation of the final color grade. And so being able to load that in, kind of do the same thing you would do with other, like you can, go into Resolve, load in like a test clip, load in that Rec 709 like conversion LUT. It's either like there's the ones for the SL2 that I think apply to this. There's the natural and the classic, and they have 709 and 2020 variants of those. So load that in and then do a little creative grading on it, export that to a cube file and put it on. I think it probably takes cube files, and load it on to the Q3, and then you have, your look the same way you would do in a normal video pipeline. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's huge. Yeah.
Well, folks, that is all the time that we have today. Bret, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. If you want to learn more about what Bret is doing, you can follow him on his social channels. I'll talk about that in just a second. Before we talk about Bret's social handles, I want to let everyone know that Leica is sponsoring PhotoVale in New York this weekend. And we have a number of events that will be there at PhotoVale with Leica. And there will also be opportunities for you to test out Leica gear, including the new Q3. So if you're in the area, I definitely invite you to utilize your phone and scan the QR code that's on the slide right here, and you will be able to sign up to the various events that we have throughout the weekend. And as mentioned, if you want to follow what Bret is doing, you have his Instagram at Bret Curry. You also have his websites, bretcurry.com. You can also find out more about what we are doing at Leica Camera USA by going to the @Leica Camera USA Instagram page or the Leica Academy page, where we do classes and workshops for those who want to dive deeper into the world of photography and videography. Bret, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for creating these amazing images. And I'm looking forward to seeing more what you create with the Q3.
So great to speak to you, Nathan. Thanks so much.
Thanks, folks. We'll see you next time.